Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Simon Borg-Olivier. So Simon is one of the most well-known, respected and established yoga teachers. We'll talk about that term later in Australia. He was recommended to me when I was traveling around Australia. He's got a background in physiotherapy. Just looking at some absolutely beautiful video of Simon's sort of very organic, natural style of moving and yoga that's on YouTube. I've heard very good things about Simon. He's got an interesting background and has been doing this a while. So Simon, welcome.
Very nice to be here with you, Mark. Thank you very much for inviting me onto your program.
And what was the beginning of your journey with the body? Let's take it right back. How did it all start for you?
My brief beginnings go back to when I was about 6 years old, and my father took me to swimming classes, and he realized that my bones were very heavy and I basically was too uncoordinated to swim on top of the water. So as a free diver in the Mediterranean Sea, he knew a lot of tricks to help you hold your breath. So he taught me how to swim an Olympic pool underwater without in one breath, and I could swim underwater very easily. And this became the beginning of a lifelong interest in breathing and especially holding my breath and controlling breathing. And then not long after that, I was traveling from England to Australia in 1968, and I met a Rhodesian, now Zimbabwean Olympic athlete named Basil Brown, who taught me some of what essentially are yogic kriyas, where you can learn to move the internal organs and, move your internal organs in a way that most people can't do, which became the cornerstone of part of my practice. And I continued that through my teenage years and then explored a lot of, natural wilderness things when I was a teenager. And then I met a Tibetan Lama when I was 17 years old, who introduced me to a lot of esoteric philosophy and some quite interesting techniques about how to control the body. And then about 20 years old, I went into what was, conventional fitness in the gym and stuff for about 2 years, including aerobics. Realized I really was not very capable of it. And then after a couple of injuries, someone showed me some stretching exercise, which later I found out was part of the same yoga that I'd been learning unbeknownst to me in my earlier years. And from there, I went to India and about 25 times and studied with all sorts of teachers in India, Thailand, Nepal, China. I've been all over the place to learn. And about 10 years after that, I realized that I didn't really understand enough. So I went back to university for my third degree in human biology, where I did a physiotherapy degree, and I'm a registered physiotherapist now as well. And I work at university and, lecture in various types of body science, stuff like that. That's probably a short, brief history.
And just to sort of place you here, this is in Australia. You're growing up, and obviously,
yes,
the sounds of things. So yeah, whereabouts?
For 50 years, I lived in Sydney, and now in the last 5 years, I've moved up to the easternmost point of Australia in Byron Bay, and I live in the hinterlands of Byron Bay.
Great. I had a few days there with my wife and saw some whales swimming past that easternmost point. It was quite magical for me, actually.
Magical. It's a good place, yes.
We have a lot of Australian listeners, actually. After the US and the UK, Australia is the biggest listenership by quite a way, actually. So it's nice to have an Australian guest on. I'd be curious to ask you more about the scene out there. But in terms of your own journey then, so what do you think it was that really drew you to yoga? Because you've dedicated yourself to it for 40 years at least now. So what drew you to it?
Well, I think at a very early age, partly through my parents and my family, and maybe even the Tibetan Lama that was teaching me as a teenager, I started to question everything in life. And I remember there was one point when I was studying biology at high school, and they were talking about the nervous system. And the nervous system started off with a spiel about how the nervous system consists of two parts: the conscious nervous system, called the somatic nervous system, which is under the control of the conscious mind, and the unconscious nervous system, also called the autonomic nervous system. And it said, which is not able to be controlled by the conscious mind. And then in brackets, it said, except by some Indian yogis.
Yeah.
And I went, who are these strange people that can control their unconscious mind, you know? And I realized then that a picture I'd seen not so long before that was a picture of this sort of like semi-naked man on top of what looked like Mount Everest. And he was just sort of sitting there naked in the snow, basically, and going, so that's a yogi. I thought that was meditation. Then I made the association with meditation, which I thought was a very difficult thing to do because, you know, someone who could meditate must be sort of like a mystic of sorts. So how can anyone live naked in the snow? But, you know, now, then as the years went on, I realized that meditation is what many people do. And I thought, now maybe they're not really doing meditation. And it's only the last couple of decades I've realized that actually the real meditation is not what most people do. Real meditation should be the ability to be very mentally able and very able to access your unconscious and, you know, very much able to access your circulatory system so that you could sit naked in the snow or sit in a hot fireplace and not really be fazed by it.
You know, I'm not sure if we had a similar book, but I also remember distinctly reading something like that, and it's saying nobody can do this, it's completely impossible except for those people who can. And I remember thinking, why is there not a chapter on them? This is fascinating. They can't. Well, this is amazing. You know what? Why? I want to be able to do it. You know, and you hear the sort of stories and things. I remember thinking, why is this a footnote? Human potential is bigger.
Yes, exactly. At the time, I was engaged in this activity, which nowadays they've called body hacking or mind hacking. And it was really my aim to try and be more in control of my physical body, to do the things that I wanted to do physically, but also mentally. And I realized that from an early age, we're all programmed with these unconscious programs which often rule people's lives. And I was trying to go through this process of checking, what am I doing? Do I really want to do it? Who told me to do it? Is it worth doing? Should I keep it or should I get rid of it? And that's something I was doing since a teenage time. And the yoga was a very good tool to do this with. And it really can be an important method of doing it. Physically, physiologically, and mentally, you can pretty much biohack anything.
And it's interesting. I'm hearing a mix or a balance between sort of Western and Eastern here. So on the one hand, I'm hearing a fascination with and respect for the East. But I'm also hearing, you know, physiotherapist, biohacking, some of the words you're using, that essentially a sort of, I'm hearing almost like a scientific method of investigation. So I'm curious about how those two things come together in you.
You know, I was doing, altogether, I was at university studying for about 20 years. And it was pretty much all in the biological sciences. I did mathematics and biochemistry and eventually, you know, molecular biology, genetics, and I did my master's in molecular genetics, and then went afterwards and did my physiotherapy degree. And I still work at RMIT University in Melbourne, like I worked at Sydney University for a long time and other universities. So my career has always been in science. But at one point in the early 80s, when it was late 80s, I'd been teaching for some years. And one of my professors said, why aren't you at the, biological sciences meeting on Tuesday nights? And I said, well, I've got to teach my yoga class. And he said, why? Are you a scientist or a yoga teacher? You've got to choose one. It's either choose science or choose yoga. And I went, well, you know, as much as I like biological sciences, yoga is much more fun. I got sick, Mark, of working in these laboratories where I was playing with radioactive chemicals, carcinogenic reagents, viruses, bacteria, and not meeting people. You know, test you are not that interesting.
Right.
So,
really, at the end of the day,
not very human. And I realized I wanted to connect with the people more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a difference between knowing the theory and also, like, you know, for me, yoga is always very practical. It's like, wow, this actually transforms me, my consciousness, my health, my well-being, my relationships. That almost struck me as much more interesting than learning the exact physiology of the shoulder joints or whatever.
Exactly. And if I may say one more thing, is that when I left at that point, right after that point, I had a lectureship at the university in the late 80s. And I pretty much had to listen to this ultimatum from the professor: either quit teaching yoga, take on a new postgraduate program and continue with the university, or if I do yoga, I'm not going to get my tenureship the following year. So I basically said I'm leaving university. But when I left the university, I had this feeling of like I'm missing something. And so that's when I elected to join a physiotherapy degree at the same university. And the physiotherapy degree was for me fusing my science and my yoga, bringing them together as one. And that's something which I never regret doing. And I feel like it really merged my two halves of my mind-body interface coming together.
I've been looking at your yoga online, so I just saw a class online, saw a couple of very beautiful videos online. I always like to look at people move that I'm interviewing, because otherwise you're just talking about something abstract. I
Yes.
probably like to get to them and train with them. I usually do that if they're in the UK, but in Australia it's a little trickier. And your yoga, I looked at it and when my first thought was, how can I put it? Something like, that looks natural. That looks like how human body's meant to move. That looks, I wouldn't say should move, but it's like, yeah, that looks like a human being, sort of fluid, organic, movement-wise. And there's so much yoga I see is straight lines and imposing shapes. And I looked at your yoga and thought, that looks human, that looks doable, that looks normal. That's not normal for yoga, weirdly. Can you say how
exactly.
way of moving? Because it's really special in its normalness, if that makes sense.
Yes. Well, look, it was the yoga that I first learned as a teenager to be more free in my body. I used to, one of the things I used to do as a teenager was take off all my clothes and go into the bush, the Australian bush, which is a very harsh bush. And my reasoning for not wearing clothes was if I didn't wear clothes, I would not be protected from the sharp bushes, and I'd have to weave my way between the bushes and make sure I didn't step on anything sharp, didn't touch the trees, and it was my exercise. But by doing this, I learned natural movement in many ways. And then when I started learning what I thought was traditional yoga in the late 70s, early 80s, it seemed so against all of this. And I actually got further and further for about 10 years into this very unnatural linear yoga.
Yeah.
And in subsequent decades, I realized that actually is not traditional yoga at all. And traditional yoga, I believe, looks more like what I'm doing now, which is much more every joint moves fluidly, the whole body, the spine especially moves like a wave. And it's, you see the remnants of what should be traditional yoga in the dance of India, the Kathakali dance, also the internal martial arts of India, the Kalari Payat, mallakhamb, and also the same thing happens in China, and they're very, very linked. The movements nowadays we see as Tai Chi and Qigong are actually there in Indian yoga as well, and they're very much related. Another thing was that as a physiotherapist, I started to rediscover movements. You probably saw in my videos me with funny wrist gestures and stuff like this, which you don't see in normal linear yoga. And I relearned them rather, as a physiotherapist as part of nerve tensioning, where you're not just stretching muscles, but you're actually lengthening the pathways of nerves and acupuncture meridians. So to me, this was part of science. But then I recalled that I was doing the same thing when I was a teenager. And then I noticed that, Chinese people were also doing it, and also the internal martial artists of India and the dancers of India, and that really modern yoga is really traditional yoga, one very, very tiny piece of it, which had been really mangled and lost in the last 100 years.
Yeah, and just for foreign listeners, just to say that the bush is what Australians call being out in nature rather than necessarily specific. Bushes or
yes.
So like for some foreign listeners, they really might not understand being out in the bush. And it's interesting, that's become fashionable now, the natural movement, like Rafe we had on, or is it Simon Thackeray, we had on from Australia, who does a lot of this work, and he has people out in the bush there and moving around naturally and through the trees. And, it's interesting that you were well ahead of the curve on that one by the sound of things. And your movement did remind me of Indian dance or Tai Chi, some of the sort of Qigong type stuff. And I'm interested in this story that you say that was more traditional. There's always this argument, isn't there, in yoga? What's traditional? That's a good thing anyway, right? But it was, how did that happen that some of that fluid movement got lost and it got replaced by this image of the sort of triangle shape that is sort of Platonic fascism, imposing the shape on the human body that the human body isn't? How did that happen?
Well, I think one of the biggest influences to this modern take on traditional yoga came from BKS Iyengar, who was this, you probably would have heard of him, there's Iyengar schools in London and all throughout the UK and around the world. And he was the very sort of, the person who really brought this very linear style in, mostly, I think, and the static sort of style in, because he basically was working with not traditional bodied Indian people. He was working with the business people in one of the major cities in India called Pune. And they were, very overweight, unhealthy Indian businessmen and businesswomen who couldn't really sit comfortably on the floor. So he modified props, he modified poses with props, took away a lot of the moving stuff and kept it very, very static. There is some moving yoga, but it's very linear moving yoga as well. There's not, Ashtanga yoga is very, very popular in the world today also, but it's very, very linear. You go forward and backward a lot. You do a couple of twists. There's hardly any sideward bending, and there's no real fluid movement. No spirals, exactly.
Spirals, no
the
jump.
body naturally has.
Yeah,
exactly. And so that stuff, was there in the traditional yoga. I've had some really good connections with. Have you heard of mallakhamb? Mallakhamb is essentially what nowadays, if someone saw it in the West, it would be called pole dancing. But the Indians in India mallakhamb means the wrestler's pole. So whereas say a person doing judo would grab someone by the neck and throw them over his body, in India, if you haven't got a wrestler to partner with, you hold a pole, and then you lift up your body and you hold the pole the same way a pole dancer holds a pole, and that. They could do all sorts of yoga postures in the pole, but they'd be very fluid, very dynamic, very much with these spiraling things that you were mentioning, and using the body, essentially moving totally from their core, not locking their core, and moving, slow when fast would be easier, and fast when slow would be easier. And a similar story comes from the people doing Karate Payat in India, which is this internal martial arts, which looks very much like it, when you see the proper forms, it looks like very advanced Chinese kung fu, really full on. With swords and stuff like
I think there's probably a Chinese kung fu influence in it. I'm not convinced it's as old as people say. It looks like it's got a modern Shaolin influence, but
well, this is what there was a program called, I think, Fight Science a few years ago, and they said they went to study the Kalari Payat, and they said, look, this stuff is just looking like it's been copied off Chinese kung fu. And at the time I wasn't sure, but since then I've had many connections with really traditional Indian people who do not let this stuff out. They keep the secret stuff so hidden. You can go for years and try and get it out of them. They won't tell you. I have seen very old books on manuscripts which are very old on the mallakhamb, and I really now do believe that this stuff actually maybe didn't start in India, but it was definitely independent of what happened in China. I know this is a big debate with people.
It's so hard to figure out, like, the actual kind of truth of these things, and in some ways I kind of feel like it doesn't matter. People to argue
it doesn't matter.
It's interesting to sort of geek out on, but ultimately it's like, well, what do we want to do in our own practice for our own well-being? What do we want to teach students, right?
Yeah, but in the end, like whether we're talking about something which comes from India or China or Thailand or Aboriginal Australia or somewhere in the middle of Europe, somewhere in a traditional culture, the body is essentially the same body over the world. It can only do a certain number of things. What's the best way to make it work? And I think all traditional cultures found out, for example, a whole bunch of common things like moving from the core, not locking your core as many people do in the West, and breathing in a way which is more natural rather than forcing breath up into the chest. Breathing very low rather than very high, and these things are common to anyone who does any internal work with the body. So I think you're right. I don't think it matters what we call it, and that's why more and more I move away from the word yoga, because I find that more than anything, modern yoga is less like traditional yoga anyway, and many people who teach modern yoga have got very little qualifications to teach it.
So what do you call it now? Like a movement, or what's your awareness work?
I'm very stuck as to what to call it. I mean, very simply, I could call it posture, movement, and breathing, and stuff like this. But unfortunately, the most people are teaching something which I mean, I don't want to sound negative to it, but the possibility is there that yoga could actually, traditional yoga can really heal people's physical bodies, physiological bodies, and mental bodies. But if I asked you, what would you prefer? If you had, say, a musculoskeletal problem, would you prefer to go see a physiotherapist or a typical yoga teacher? I mean, most people would say a physiotherapist knows more if you've got an understanding of your body, if you've got a critical body problem. And if you wanted to fix something like a digestive issue or, like pancreatic problems, where would you go? To a yoga teacher or to a doctor, I mean, most people would say a doctor knows more. And if you had a mental problem, where would you go? To a yoga teacher or to a psychologist, psychiatrist? Basically, yoga in the modern world seems to think that it can address, musculoskeletal, medical, and psychiatric problems. But really, if anyone had half a brain, they'd probably go to a doctor, physiotherapist, or psychologist.
Might give out a bit of advice on those topics, but most people, I think, are trusting those 200 hours in Goa probably aren't sufficient to.
Exactly, and that to me is a big shame, because it's exactly what the world of yoga has been reduced to. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I did spend 20 years at university studying biological sciences, and to me, it's a real shame that Yoga Alliance in America has made it now that you can become a yoga teacher in 200 hours. This to me is a travesty.
You can do it as an online.
To me, it's a real shame. So for me, it's physically destroyed my business credibility and my ability to earn a sensible living, and it's also made it very difficult for many people who are serious practitioners to actually have classes, because nowadays in Australia alone, there's 28 to 30,000 yoga teachers who have, certified in 200 hours. Imagine if doctors could get certified in 200 hours, and you say open practice.
Yeah. Well, I hear your frustration, actually. I love your passion for this. Can I ask you to slow down just a little bit? I also like to speak quickly, but we have a lot of second language speakers. And I'm thinking with a British and Australian accent, if we both go at a fast speed, people won't be able to get us. But I love your passion for this. And I agree, imagine if doctors could be qualified so quickly, the market would be flooded with doctors. And increasingly I hear yoga teachers say, and also life coaches the same, actually, I'm embarrassed to say I'm a yoga teacher when I meet people because of the image they will have of that. Does that make sense? They're embarrassed because people will think of them as a sort of bad gymnastics teacher giving out new age advice. Yes,
exactly. I mean, if I have to write anywhere what's my profession, I put physiotherapist or university lecturer. I wouldn't put yoga teacher.
Yeah, and there's something sad about that, isn't there? That it's become sort of degraded in that way.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, what are some of the other principles of your yoga then? Because I'm looking at it. It's beautiful. It's fluid. Like how would you talked about the core and breathing. What are some of the other principles behind this movement I'm seeing?
I teach 4 basic principles for beginners, and they are that one is to move actively into a position. So rather than grabbing your foot and putting it into a typical lotus posture or sticking your leg behind the head, I'll use your own body muscles to come into a posture, and that I call that active movement. And what that does is it gives you flexibility without stretching and strength without feeling tense, and it gives you blood flow without the heart racing, and it basically gives you access to your nervous system. Because normally if people use external forces to come into postures like gravity or one limb pulling another or momentum, you will stimulate a stretch reflex, which is part of a flight or fight response. So then when people feel a typical stretch, what they're doing is they're putting their body into a sympathetic nervous system overload, and they're becoming actually in a place where they're turning off their immune system, digestive system, reproductive system, and entering a dominant state of flight or fight. And then the emotions on a subconscious level will be gearing towards fear, anger, aggression, lack of safety, lack of trust. So by moving actively into a position, you actually tell the body not to tense up, and you basically take the brake off. Otherwise, what most people do is stretching is trying to drive with an accelerator and a brake on at the same time.
Yeah.
By moving actively, you control your nervous system. That's a major principle I use. And I can use external forces, but I use them after, not first. And that, to me, is a traditional way of working. Mm-hmm. Indian yogis will not grab their leg, put it behind the head. They'll lift their leg up and it goes behind the head, palms together in front of the chest. Obviously, not everyone can do that, but that's the way it would be considered the traditional way of doing things.
So that's number one.
Number one. Second principle is to move from the core, not to lock the core. So many people talk about the core as being the abdominal muscles, but actually the core is a lot deeper. It's actually an invisible micro dot point between your navel and your pubic bone, between your L4, L5 and the tailbone, between your diaphragm and your pelvic floor. And around that central point where all movement should start from, there is a large plexus of nerves called your enteric nervous system, which is also part of your autonomic or automatic nervous system. And it's such a large plexus of nerves that it's bigger than what you've got in your spinal cord. It's bigger than a cat's brain, and it's able to basically control all the movement in your body. And it's, of course, the root of the gut-brain interaction that is so commonly talked about now. So when I say move from your core, it triggers that part of the nervous system, and along with that, there is the concept which is made popular in the late 80s in physiotherapy circles, where they say before you move you should draw your lower abdomen inwards. You've probably heard that expression, draw your navel to the spine. It was coined by Australian physiotherapists in the 1980s, but then subsequently they realized that just by telling people that, they weren't actually doing what they thought.
Yeah.
Because you can draw the navel to the spine in a good way, but most people, like 2/3 of people when you do it, what they do when they draw the navel to the spine is actually lock the core and inhibit the diaphragm and just enter a state of stress.
Yeah.
So it's actually not a good thing to do.
Yeah,
But when you move from the core, it's different.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. I've done a lot of martial arts, and you learn that sort of center and working from center, and it just becomes an obvious and efficient way to move. And naturally, you would do this if you were pushing a car, say, where you really had to make some effort. You'd put your center into it. That's a normal. We hold things in our center. I don't drink a cup of tea, to the side. That's all in this central area. And it was strange to me when I started doing more yoga, and people would move a limb almost like ballet dancers, like independently of the rest of their body. And I think that can't be good. Isn't the whole point is the body's one unit, one system, and moving from center in an integrated way seems powerful and healthy and psychologically more functional. It just seemed to make sense to me. So I found it a bit bizarre when I'd see someone put a leg out to the side without, like a ballet dancer, without any integration. I'd go, why?
Yes, and they lock the core with a neutral spine and think they're doing themselves a favor. They're just locking their spine and disabling their body, weakening their arms and their legs. And as a martial artist, what sort of martial arts did you do?
I did a lot of Aikido. I do a little bit of Systema now, but I've done a lot of Aikido. Yes. I was a live-in Aikido student for a few years.
Right, so these are internally based martial arts. So you would have been told to breathe into your abdomen, to move from your abdomen.
Yeah.
To me, this is natural yoga. And in the modern world of yoga, you're often being told to pull in the abdomen and breathe into your chest, which doesn't make any sense at all.
It's anxiety provoking, right? I mean, that's how I breathe when I'm stressed. Why would I want to replicate that? It doesn't make sense.
Exactly. And that's where I think that traditional yoga never did that. It's modern yoga that got a little bit interspersed with outdated concepts in physiotherapy in the late 1990s, and they still haven't realized the mistake they've made, because traditional yoga never had that. It was always breathing. Deep breathing meant you breathe deep into your body, not into your chest. And deep, when you hear in a yoga class, make a deep, long breath in, everyone expands their chest for 3 seconds.
Yeah.
When I say deep, long breath in, I mean breathe into your pelvic floor or your feet, and then inhale for 2 minutes. That's a deep, long breath in.
2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes. That's a deep, long breath in. So what I generally teach in terms of the third principle is, for beginners, relearn natural breathing. And once you've relearned natural breathing, then the possibilities of expanding that to more complex breath is possible. But most people would be better off if they just did natural breathing all the time. Which is breathe low, exhale passive. There's not much of it. You can forget about it and go on with other things, and you breathe through your nose. And that's, for me, a major principle that I'll say, I'm not going to teach you any fancy breathing until you master natural breathing, which is something that kids do, but most adults lose by the time they're 10 or 12 usually.
Quick interruption to tell you about my book, Embodiment, creatively named, hey? Actually, embodiment moving beyond mindfulness. You can find this online at theembodimentbook.com. That's theembodimentbook.com. So this book is an introduction to the whole field. If you like these interviews, you'll probably love this book. Funny stuff, poems, personal stories from my life, illustrating what embodiment is all about, and loads for professionals in the field too. Top teaching tips, language tips, that kind of thing. Yeah, a real condensation of everything I've learned about embodiment, basically. So you can get pre-orders at Amazon.com, and if you just put in embodiment moving beyond mindfulness, that's the name of the book, or go to theembodimentbook.com. On there, you'll see quotes from various teachers, a bunch of fun illustrations, and you can also get the first chapter completely free online at theembodimentbook.com. Enjoy, and back to the interview. Yeah, the other mistake I've seen with this though is when people fixate on belly breathing, I've seen this a lot in martial artists, Japanese guys, they stop moving the chest at all. So there is, and that can sort of kill some of the passion of the breath. You know, some of the emotion is very Asian in a way. Whereas for me, it's like the belly breath, and then some natural chest movement is there too, rather than sort of closing down that area and just pushing the belly in and out muscularly.
Yes, now that doesn't work either. It's just in the what I tell them to do is I put them together. It's breathe naturally while moving from your core. And so the core, the small version, is the middle between the navel and the pubic bone. But the large version of your core is your trunk. So I place a big emphasis on moving the spine. And as you move the spine while breathing naturally, although the diaphragm works first, it instantly causes the chest to also expand at the same time. So it's exactly as you say. You can't just disable it in the belly. Otherwise, you become, fairly weak and with back problems. Mm-hmm. So it's move from the core, which occasionally will make your core very, very strong. I mean, my core is probably the strongest part of my body, but I can relax it totally, and I can make it hard in an instant. But to have it hard the whole time would be a mistake. To keep it soft all the time would probably not be very helpful in most situations either. But it's move from the core and breathe naturally, which actually makes a complex pattern of breathing all by itself.
Simon, this is great. I feel like sometimes when I'm interviewing someone, it's like a free masterclass. This is brilliant. Really enjoying this. Very generous. And so we've got the 3 and 4 now. We've got to 1 and 2.
1 and 2. So one was move actively. 2 is move from your core. 3 is breathe naturally. And 4 is move fluidly. So when I say move fluidly, it means that it's also with 3, with breathe naturally, is that once you start breathing naturally, you no longer lock the core, because the most unnatural breathing would be something like tighten your pelvic floor, exhale into your abdomen, and make a deep breath into the chest. That's, as you said, it just causes stress and it locks the core and causes more back pain and dysfunction. So the opposite of that, more natural breathing, breathe into your pelvic floor, breathe into your abdomen, relax and let the air out. That allows your core to move freely. But then the 4th principle I call move fluidly. And so move fluidly would mean for me, say, if you have a car that drives forward and backward, it's very energy inefficient. You'd have to put the accelerator on, then hit the brake, and then accelerate backwards and hit the brake again, accelerate forward. So that would be very jarring on the person in the car. It would also be very wasteful on the brake and the accelerator. So say, for example, you had to also travel from left to right and then right to left. You'd have the same problem of having to go forward and back, left, right. And so the way I describe flow is don't go forward, backward, and don't go left, right. Go to the right, then forward, then to the left, then backward. And you make a big circle out of those 4 points. And by moving circularly, if you're driving a car, you never take the foot off the accelerator or brake. You can keep going at the same speed, but because it's a circular motion, you generate a centrifugal or centripetal force, and that force you can use to your advantage. And basically every joint in the body moves in a circular fashion anyway. So to have it stop and turn back in the opposite direction is stupid. And you would have probably learned these type of movements, I think, in the martial arts that you're doing. All movement naturally is circular. So I do circles, I do figure eights and spirals and things like this in the body through three-dimensional space with each joint. But once you start mixing the joints, then actually you're playing with multi-dimensions, because if your spine moves in 3 dimensions, then your body moves in 3 dimensions. Already you've multiplied it by to 9
It's incredibly complex. When they try and get a robot to do some like basic walking or basic picking up a glass of water, they literally can only just about do that now. And then this is like some of the top scientists from NASA and Boston Dynamics can just about make a robot work. Because once you have the complexity of, this joint times that joint times that joint times that joint, you look at an insane degree of complexity.
It's insane.
It also occurs to me that this fluid movement is naturally appealing. Like, we like to look at it. Like, we like the feel of it in our own body. We go, it feels good. Or we see a sports person moving fluidly and we want to watch that. We'll pay money to watch that. Or a beautiful dancer, a beautiful woman who's just fluid in her movement. Like, as a man, I go, I light up and it's beautiful. Like, it's that soothing aesthetic quality, I think, is not a byproduct. That's wisdom speaking. You know what I mean? Like this
it's beauty.
The feel of that movement.
Yes, it should be. And that part of that fluidity for me is, I tell people, be graceful in your movement, make it beautiful, make it feel. I say to them, make it feel like you're in a warm bath being massaged by someone who really loves you. So it's got to, and when you do it, it really does. The movements themselves that I'm describing and the 4 principles, when you do them, will make your body very, very hot very quickly if you're in the cold, but your heart rate stays very, very low, because the heart's actually one of the worst pumps of blood in the body. And a person with good circulation should be able to go out in the cold and have no clothes on and be warm. But to actually master the art of using the other pumps of blood through the body, of which I've counted 11 other pumps other than the heart, that's quite an art. And the secrets of natural movement and natural posture and breathing actually allow you to move blood without the heart racing. And then you've got good energy flowing through your body and loving information. When I say good energy, I mean good blood flow. When I say loving information, I say the information that is the more dominant state when you have the parasympathetic nervous system dominant rather than the sympathetic nervous system. That feeling of love, peace, safety, trust. And so that's what I'm trying to do in my teaching and my practice. But the best way I say to people is, look, make it feel like you're in a warm bath being massaged by someone who really loves you. And then it does feel really sensuous and graceful and beautiful to watch. And
Yeah. And that being led by feeling, not a visual aesthetic. So this is the tricky thing. You can impersonate that visually, right? And it doesn't have quite the same taste or flavor. It's not quite as satisfying. There's a lot of it that's very visual, but they're going for the aesthetic first, whereas they're actually going for the feeling, which has a different health impact, and the aesthetic is a natural expression of
byproduct.
That. Yeah, it's a byproduct. It's not the primary thing.
Yes, I always say to people, it's not called yoga if it's something you're doing for later. It's got to feel good while you're doing it. You've got to be in the here and now and enjoying it for the here and now, not doing something which is for later. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's you're not looking at the here. It's be here. Yoga really is a state of be here now and be connected with all things in the here and now, and that's something which you can feel in this sort of thing.
Yeah, for me, if it's, people were very reluctant to say something isn't yoga. And like, there's a great book, What Makes You Not a Buddhist? And I thought it's a great book title. It's really bold. It's really powerful, And he's, the guy says, look, there's various kinds of Buddhism, blah, blah, blah. But these are the key things, And for me, it's like, is something yoga if it isn't based on awareness in the here and now? And I would say no. And I feel like that we need to make some stands around this. We need to say, look, there's lots of great ways of doing yoga. There's lots of things that can be cool. But if it isn't awareness-based and it doesn't have an ethical component, it's something else. And it might be great gymnastics or great athletics. I went to the gym this morning. I'm not against the gym. But it's something else. It's a different activity when I'm in the gym. So I feel like there needs to be a kind of line that senior yoga teachers say, you know what, I'm open-minded, but this is a line.
Yes. You can probably put that principle of yoga into any activity, but there are some activities that are easier to do it than others for various people. And so I think that statement that we've just discussed has to be made by yoga teachers and practitioners around the world, that we're really looking for something which makes you feel in the present moment in terms of and being connected to all things. I mean, this is the state of being in the zone. This is a state of total well-being, and it's been shown to give that meditation feeling, which they say that really could enhance telomere length and longevity. So it doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it yoga, you can call it meditation, you can call it being in the zone or anything else. But what seems to be the thing you look for is having good circulation and having a calm nervous system, and having which is signified by low heart rate and low breath rate or low minute ventilation, plus at the same time having a brainwave, a brain pattern and brainwave pattern where you've got coherent synchronous brain waves, and you've got that the default center of the brain has been deactivated, and the default center is this part of the brain which controls time traveling. So you stop time traveling, you stay in the here and now.
Yeah,
and the default center.
Yeah.
The default network, yeah. So then the other bit that it controls is the ego. So then you no longer think of yourself as separate to the activities you're doing or separate to other people.
Yeah,
so that I think is really a statement of it.
Yeah. So it's selfing, isn't it? As a verb, it's creating that sense of separation. And
yes.
As you say, keeping you out of the here and now. That's one system that does both of those things neurologically. So for me, for something to be yoga, if yoga is union, then okay, union with what? Well, in that sense, it's union with the here and now and everything. So for me, that seems to be a key activity, whether it's using weights or dancing or done with dogs or whatever. Like, as long as it's doing that, for me, I could say that's yoga.
It's yoga. Yes.
Yeah.
Do people achieve that very easily? Most people don't achieve that, I don't think. Not in a class and not the way it's mostly taught. It could be done in every activity, but I think what I'd like to see in the world would be the world of modern yoga and modern exercise actually going back to making that the main goal. And I think that modern exercise is slowly heading that way. They slowly made the shift from doing cardio 3 times a week, get your heart rate up for 45 minutes a session 3 times a week, to more high intensity interval training, and then gradually realizing the importance of increasing heart rate variability. So you've got low heart rate to heart rate increasing over the space of minutes. So when I'm practicing the type of practice that I do, I'll have quite high heart rate variability. So my inhalation causes heart rate to go up, exhalation causes it to go down, and that way I've got high intensity, low intensity training at the same time as I'm practicing. I think it's a much better way of practicing.
Sports science and things. I've always found the Australians quite impressive when it comes to sports science, and I said this in another interview. I looked at some data, and Australia, every country in the Olympics, the number of medals won can be tracked by population size and GDP, except Australia.
Yes.
So you're the one exception to this. So so I go,
they have heaps of medals for hardly any people.
Right, for hardly any people, and the GDPs, it's not a third world country, but it's not the same GDP as Japan or America or somewhere.
No.
And why is that? Well, it's partly cultural. There's an outdoor culture, an exercise culture, but also your sports science is pretty advanced. Like the average guy in the gym I've spoken to in Australia will say, mate, you need to be doing this number of reps with this way and this way. And I'm like, wow, you're not just a meathead. You are really thought of stuff. And that's just like some bloke in the gym helping me out, So I was quite impressed by what I've seen come out of Australia in regard to the sort of scientific side of this. So maybe you could say a little bit more about that and how that is that making an influence on the yoga scene there? Is it a separate world? And then there's the shadows of that, right? Like all the steroid abuse that's there, and the body beautiful culture and all the rest of it.
Yes. Well, I've seen the steroid abuse all over the world equally. I think people in Australia have moved away from it in recent years because they realize how dangerous it is. But I remember when I first started teaching internationally, which was about nearly 30 years ago, and I found that when I was traveling overseas, there was almost no yoga and very, very low levels of the yoga that I saw in America, in Europe, in Asia. And Australia had a very, very high level of yoga at the time. It seemed to arrive in Australia much earlier, and I know the sources. So we got it very early. And also the physiotherapy in Australia is very advanced for various reasons. And that, a lot of the research stuff that's gone around the world came from Australia, also Canada as well. But Australia, for a small nation, did make a big impact. So it's something which is, like you say, it's the culture of living outside here. But for whatever reason, there's a lot of good stuff coming from Australia. I'm not born here, but I'm very proud of having lived here, and I know that what's coming out of here is very good.
Okay, one thing I was going to ask you at the end, but I might as well say it now, just so listeners can hear it as well. I'm looking for more Australians and New Zealanders as well to have on the show. So if you can recommend any good sort of embodiment or movement practitioners, then do tell them I exist or send me their emails or whatever, because I try to make this show really international. And it's so easy to just have Americans on because they're good at promoting themselves. Australia's sort of off to the side, isn't it? Like you have to be a really good teacher, really well known as an Australian teacher to be able to travel. Maybe, Bali obviously has that Australian connection, but there's not so many Australian teachers, say, teaching in, Try Yoga in London or, the big yoga centers. You find more Americans. And
yes, funny, isn't it? It's funny.
I'm kind of curious, like, why that is. Like, is it just geographical? The flights are expensive, It
is. It's a long trip. I came back from Europe the other day, and it was basically 2 days travel. It was, really exhausting.
It's a lot.
I get invited to Try Yoga a lot, but I've only actually taught there once because it's never quite the right time, and you can't just really justify a trip to one place. So I try and organize 20 workshops at once, which is a big headache. I think America is closer, definitely. But
Australia seems to be sort of half England, half America these days, because it seems to be like traditionally, obviously, it's a British place, and then a British influence, British colony, and then now the American influence seems to be even more. So now it's got this almost mid-Atlantic kind of feel to it.
Yes, it has.
Like the extroversion there is much more American in some ways than traditionally English, certainly.
Yes. I can recommend my business partner, Bianca Matchless, because she studied with me in India like 30 years ago. We traveled many times to India and worked with the senior teachers like BKS Iyengar. And then, like me, she also, after having taught for some years, went to study physiotherapy as well. So we run Yoga Synergy together, although I don't get to see her as much as I'd like because now she lives in a different city. But from a female perspective, I think she's very, very good.
You'll throw me a few emails afterwards. Other people you think of that are out there. Byron Bay, I know, has got quite a scene, so they don't have to be yogis. Okay, Simon. So another thing I wanted to ask you about is the kind of talk about movement, but the wider sense of yoga. So often, yoga today is often reduced to movement, maybe a little bit of breath work, but obviously yoga is much more than that. So can you say something about the kind of bigger picture of yoga in life? This is one of my obsessions, or the different principles of yoga.
Yeah, I think there's a very sad misunderstanding of the main principles of philosophical yoga, and they go along the lines of they talk about the first stage of Ashtanga yoga as being yama, and the second stage niyama as being the philosophical or moral disciplines. Have you heard of these?
Yes, yeah.
And so they're often translated as non-violence, non-lying, non-stealing, non-sexuality, and non-attachment, like this. And this, to me, is a really gross misunderstanding and a mistranslation. And in Sanskrit, the word that they've translated is as in ahimsa. Asteya means non-violence or non-stealing. Aparigraha means non-attachment. But it's always translated wrong because the word the sound in Sanskrit should actually mean the opposite of. So a better translation would be not non-violence, but the opposite of violence, which is totally gentleness. And a better translation of non-attachment should be not non-attachment, but rather, if you're not stuck to something, you're free. So it's about freedom. And not non-stealing, it should be giving. So then when you reinterpret this the way it was meant to be, you get the idea that yama is a concept, the essence of yoga should be when you're doing a gentle, balanced giving of nourishing communication and freedom. Like, for example, to have an idea that, you shouldn't have sex, that's just stupid. I mean, that was not the idea to not have sex. What we don't want is inappropriate sexual misconduct or someone, trying to interact with another person on, say, a sexual level where they're getting off and the other person's not enjoying it. What we want really for sexuality is to have appropriate sex where both people are communicating lovingly and having a mutual interaction which is beneficial for both. And for that, then you don't actually need the sexual You don't need touch even. It can be just two people communicating lovingly. So the opposite of bad sex is brahmacharya. Brahmacharya means not no sex. It means the exact opposite of really bad, inappropriate communication. So
Uh-huh.
to me, brahmacharya means loving communication.
Interesting. And, that might involve a certain amount of restraint, but it might actually be really healthy flirting, for example.
Yes, yes. Or just two people communicating, chatting and talking in a way where both people listen, both people talk, you look into a person's eye. That's also brahmacharya, I think, And,
Nice.
and also sometimes they talk about this, don't be honest, but it's such a bad translation. It's not about not lying. It's about being balanced about what you say and do. So, for example, I think of it more like, if you said to someone, look, to be honest, your clothes are making you look really fat. To be honest, you look really hideous today. To be honest, you look really sickly and disgusting, and you smell so much, I don't really want to be here. That sort of honesty doesn't win friends and influence people, nor does it make people feel good. So it's better to be balanced about what comes out of your mouth, in the same way that when you're running an honest business, you do goods and services which are in harmony with what you're paying. So you don't say, here's a banana, it costs $1,000. You'd be considered a dishonest fruiterer if you were charging $1,000 for a banana. So you give balance. It's about balance to me, and not just not lying, because it's better to be balanced. So that's why I say that yama is the gentle, balanced giving of nourishing communication and freedom. And I practice in a way that I'm trying to give that to myself. And if I do my own physical practice and I do my own teaching of physical practice in terms of posture, movement, breath control, mental control, then what I find is that my body has received these messages over and over again. And then I'm much more likely to treat other people in that same way.
Nice. So you're practicing that in yourself repeatedly. You're building, because it's only one neural pathway, right? Whether it's imaginative, self-directed, or other-directed, it's just one set of pathways. So you're building that again and again and again in yourself.
Yes.
So that's the natural flow of how your neurons work when you actually with someone else.
Yes. And it's like, to me, if I have to do that on a physical level, I have to do it by, spreading good information, good energy to my body, which is for me getting the circulatory system to work adequately, and also spreading loving information, which, like I said, is getting the parasympathetic nervous system to dominate over the sympathetic. So that way I've got the feeling of trust and safety as opposed to flight or fight.
Yeah, that's and then stuff. Yeah.
And that means also then you have less chance of having things like cancer, because cancer cells are when one set of cells is really dominant and greedy, and I want to keep all the energy for myself as opposed to sharing it equally. And you get things like without this gentle principle inside your body, you're more likely to get autoimmune disease, where one set of cells decide to kill all the other cells. So I'm looking for perfect health in my own body by treating my body lovingly and making every cell of the body treat every other cell of the body with yama and niyama. So I make every cell of the body, 50 trillion cells, treat each other like a mother treats a young baby.
Nice. Wow, that's a beautiful. I think as we move towards wrap up, that's a really beautiful way to put it. Is there any kind of other aspects that you think underlooked at in modern yoga, or things that really define yoga as you see it, that you want to touch upon before we wrap up?
There was something I had before. Unless you can think of what I was going to think of, I can't think.
Put you on the spot a little bit. I mean, is there anything you tend to say in class often, or that people often say, wow, they really took that away as a bit different from your workshops, for example, that they might not get from the average yoga workshop?
One of my teachers told me once that if you want to get yoga, you've only got to do three things. One is unblock the blockages of good energy and loving information in your body. Two is make the energy move through your body. And three is just sit back and enjoy the natural paradise we have inside ourselves, which is the state that we're born with children and kids. And really, we're trying to get back to that natural state. And I think many yoga teachers and many yoga practitioners and athletes and sports people are trying to achieve the supernatural. And supernatural is possible, but it's unrealistic for the modern person living in a very unnatural world. So I think we should recognize that we're normal people living in a very unnatural world. And even if you want to aspire towards supernatural, then the first step should be go back to natural. Breathe naturally, move naturally, think naturally, use children as a model. Children laugh 300 times a day. You're lucky if you get twice out of the average adult. So I think we should, my main philosophy in life is these three things, which sound a bit simplistic, I've been told. But number one is enjoy your life, because the concept of yoga, they talk about santosha, which they translate terribly as contentment. But I don't think it's contentment we want. We want to choose our mood. And the best mood you can choose is happiness, although sometimes you might choose misery. I chose misery for 2 days when my father died. He wouldn't have wanted more. But happiness is what makes you a better person. It makes you also more able to help other people and live long and be healthy. So to choose to enjoy your life is a main principle. I think we're here to enjoy our lives. This is the heaven on earth that we have in our bodies and in the existence we've had. So number one main principle, philosophy of life, enjoy your life. Number two main principle, this is our body and we have to look after it. So really look after your body. And then number three, put it to some use. Help other people enjoy their lives. That's my principles. Enjoy your life, look after your body, use that to help other people enjoy their lives by spreading good energy and loving information in the acts that you do, having started within yourself and spread that to the people around you and the world and the animals and the trees and the land, everything.
Wonderful, Simon. This is great stuff. I'm glad you've got some resources online for those who can't make it to Australia or the other sort of travel schedule you have. I can see online there's little introductory courses to breath and movement and things, and that's at simonborg-olivier.com, right?
Yes, you can go to simonborg-olivier.com. You can also go to yogasynergy.com, and both of those websites have online resources you can either see for free or you can join in and buy some material as well, which as part of a course. And I have the Yoga Synergy YouTube channel with 200 videos. I have Simon Synergy on Instagram and my name, Simon Borg-Olivier, on Facebook. And we have also lots of really cool trainings around the world. And although they are certified as teacher training courses, I'm not interested in training teachers as much as I am interested in getting people to teach themselves. So the most important teacher training component of my trainings is learn how to practice for yourself, learn how to be your own teacher. And that's why I pretty much will accept anyone into my trainings. And all they've got to do is be able to have the humility to work at a level which is appropriate for them. And I try and make it accessible for all people.
Simon, this has been great. I really felt like it's been a total gift, and definitely let me know next time you're back in the UK or Europe, and I'd like to get to one of your workshops for sure. I don't think I'm going to be out of Australia for a while, so let me know when you're back, and as much notice as possible. I'd definitely love to attend something, and I've made a note to your site there to sort of look at more of the stuff online. I'm just subscribed to your YouTube channel as well, so really appreciate the inspiration today. Thank you, Simon.
Well, if anyone wants to contact me, what I'll do is I'll send you a bunch of links that maybe you can use for yourself. And if any of the listeners would like to contact me, then you can email me at simon@yogasynergy.com. And I'm happy to send them out a couple of links to some simple spinal movement sequences, maybe some links to some lectures that I've given, which might summarize more of what I'm saying. And I'm happy to do that to anyone who writes to me.
Great, yeah. Or if there's something Aggie can put on the when we upload this as well, just send it to Aggie. I know you've been in contact with, so that's doable too. Simon, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is such a pleasure to talk to you, Mike. Thank you very much. I really love your work, and I really enjoy talking with you. That's really nice.
Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/embodiment podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodyfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. If most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodyfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment Podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on the embodyfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you. Until next time, welcome home to the body.